Hey there, YouTube. I think we're on. I'm on with Andreas.
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, Andreas, my one of my favorite nerds out there training all the time. And we've got an interesting topic today. This was your idea, my man. You're like, oh, let's talk about competing with red dot versus competing with irons.
Because they are very different things, as I recently found out.
All right, so let's talk through your history a little bit so people know where you're coming from. Now you've been shooting what since is it 2012 you started? Or 2010?
Seriously about that long. So I've been shooting seriously over 10 years. I kind
Yeah,
of got started in this pretty late.
yeah, and I mean by serious, you mean like you're at the range, like training maybe twice a week usually, I
Yeah,
think.
well, yeah, these days it's generally twice a week. It hasn't always been that much, but yeah, these days it's twice a week.
You're doing the dry fire, you teach a little bit.
Yeah,
You're pretty invested. Okay, so how much of your shooting career have you done with iron sights?
probably 90%, 95%.
Right.
This optics thing is pretty new. And it's really just because I'm teaching classes, and there was a class I taught where I was the only person with an iron-sighted gun,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking I need to stay relevant here. So let's put a dot on some guns and go.
Yeah, now
So
you know how Bob Vogel feels teaching.
yeah, well, but yeah, so I got the dots on, trained up with those, shot some matches with those, and it's kind of cool. And then a bunch of us said, "Yeah, let's shoot production at this next match." And so I got in, I think maybe one or two training sessions with my production gun, went out to the match, and it was just a total shit show, man. It was bad. It was bad.
So tell me more. Tell me more about this. Like, would you say your iron sight skills degraded?
I would say yes. There's visual feedback that you get from a dot that you don't get from irons
Mm-hmm.
that I think changes the nature of the game considerably. And I was expecting to see that stuff, and I was shooting like I was getting it, but it wasn't there. And I just had I had a lot of accuracy problems. So
Okay, and
things
you
like,
think that that was due to lack of the feedback of like from the sight, like so how the gun's tracking and recoil, or was there something you were doing with your grip, or
yeah, I
what's
think
the problem?
one of the things or one of my theories is that a dot helps you with shooting fundamentals, particularly keeping the gun steady as you pull the trigger.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you look at a spot and you put the dot there and you pull back on the trigger, it's so obvious if you're moving the gun.
Huh?
And I think that subconsciously that helps you keep the gun steady and not pull a trigger with your whole hand. Um, and with the dot or the irons, you're not getting that feedback. So you just got these blurry sights out there, and you're looking where you want the bullets to go, and it's just not as obvious if you're moving the gun around a little bit.
Okay.
Like with
Yeah.
the dot, it just yells at you if you're making any mistakes. Same thing with tracking and how the gun returns. It's just all the feedback, like the volume on it is turned up.
Yeah.
And I think I was shooting expecting to get that level of feedback, and it wasn't there. And they were just like pushing C's on the second shot, pushing some D's on the second shot. And yeah, it's not as obvious when you're making these mistakes with irons.
And that's really interesting. Yeah, I thought we'd go with like aiming the gun, sighting the gun, but no, it's like you're saying that the feedback you get off the dot, and it's like you would agree the feedback's there with irons.
You
It's
got to
just
look a lot
harder to
harder. You
suss
got to
it.
look a lot harder. And
Yes,
I don't think it's ever as good.
but you have to like go. It's like you have to go get the information in a
Yeah.
sense, rather
Yeah.
than your dot. It's kind of like no, you're gonna know things whether you want to or not, there, buddy.
Yes. Yes. And I really do think, like in teaching, people who are starting the game are just getting so much better, so much faster. And I used to think that it was entirely due to so much more material being out there. And I still think that's partially true, but I think it's also that like these new cats who are jumping into the sport, they're putting dots on their guns and shooting that immediately. Like they're not even like people aren't even bothering with irons anymore. And
No, I mean,
I just think like from day one, they're used to they're getting the feedback from the dot.
well, also, I mean, I think the equipment's gotten better. It's gotten better for sure. Like it wouldn't be weird or out of place for somebody in 2005 to shoot production in USPSA with like a bone stock Glock. Well, hell,
Correct.
that was back in the day. I mean, a Glock 34 with iron sights, maybe a trigger job. That was like state of the art in production
Yeah.
20 years ago. That was the hot setup. And
Yeah.
now,
Then Angus got the SPO1 shadows in. And like
sure,
that was the jam for a while.
sure, but now, I mean, there's so many more aftermarket options just for like sights and triggers and,
Yeah.
and grip modules and grip panels. And it's so easy to fit the gun to you, to, 40 calibers gone. Like we're not shooting heavier calibers even. It's like, I think it's a much easier thing now, which makes
Yeah.
sense. Like it should get easier as you
Well,
go.
I'd say it's easier and it's not. I would say that the shooting fundamentals aren't stressed as much. And it's more like raw, you can get a lot farther on raw speed.
Yeah, maybe.
So I think when you're shooting high cap, you're teaching yourself just to send makeups immediately. And like when I've been like last year or two, and I've been really tuned up with my irons gun, and I'm squatted with guys who are shooting dots, and you get these long range stages where they're like tuxedos at 20 yards. And this was before we went to production 15. Like the way I'm attacking those stages and the way they are shooting is just completely different. Like I'm deliberately firing every shot on those 20-yard partials,
Yes.
and they're hardcover. So the dot guys are just like, I got 8 extra rounds I can burn in this position. So they're just going chick 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 chick, and I mean, you can you can just hear like the makeups, like there are 2, 3 makeups in there, and it's like they're barely breaking cadence to fire them. It's just a completely different way to shoot.
Yeah, I would say, well, in a sense, that way it's gotten a lot easier. Like USPSA is easier just to navigate the stages if you're shooting high cap dots.
Yes.
It's just easier. Back in the days of, iron sights and then an actual like 10 rounds it's interesting. Not, it's for what you're talking about. It's not so much the, forcing people to reload as they run around all the time. That's very interesting. But the risk mitigation you do,
Yeah.
when you're restricted on ammo, it's like, no, you don't have ammo for extras. Like you have to hit when I mean, that kind of stuff like that.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
definitely
That
changed.
changes the way you're shooting partials and far steel for sure.
Mhm.
Like
Yep.
particularly if they're hardcover partials, where it's just, man, you just fire a makeup. Like you're not getting a penalty if you drop it. You just fire the makeup.
Yeah.
And same thing with steel. I mean, steel is a lot like hardcover partials. It's like shooting tuxedos when you shoot steel. Like there's no penalty for a makeup. You gotta get one in the center.
All right. Let's shift to another kind of comparative aspect of dots and irons. And this is what jumps out at me when I think about the real separator for me between
Mm-hmm.
dots and irons. Like obviously, as the targets get further away, the irons are more challenging.
Yes.
Obviously. At 3, 5, 7, 10 yards, I would say irons are not really a hindrance compared to a
There's
dot.
practically no difference. No.
It's maybe an advantage not to have the dot on there, right? Because you have so much awareness about where the sight is from so many different angles. I mean, I'm talking about at close range. But again, as the distance extends, the dot becomes more and more of an advantage. And I think you see this the most. I'll see if you agree with this. This zone, like from 12 to maybe 17 yards or, 10 to 15, 12 to 20, whatever, somewhere in this range, depending on the shooter and the
Mm-hmm.
gun. It becomes much, much, much more difficult with iron sights. And to me, that's where I flip the switch between my sights can be lined up, like the alignments doesn't matter. I just see front through the rear, and the front can be anywhere. And if I
Yes.
see that picture superimposed on stuff, I'm going to send it. And
Yes.
if it's just a USPSA target, it's going to be an A or maybe a close C,
Yes.
right?
100%.
Now, as soon as like that'd be like at 12, 10, 12 yards, that's the way I'd shoot. Just that flash sight picture and not no cleaning it up, just send it. As soon as you flip that target at like 12 yards to an 8-inch plate, now the red dot and the irons become very different to shoot. Whereas if I'm looking at that plate, if I see red all the way inside the plate, I'll pull the trigger. But if I see that sight picture superimposed over the plate, I always have to check, like, where's the front sight at inside of the picture? And I might have to adjust. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. I liken it that when you get out, when you're shooting, or for me, when I'm shooting 5 yards, 6 yards, 7 yards, I'm really only using the front sight. Like my index is good enough that unless it's some just crazy torqued up firing position, I can just assume that the front sight is in the rear notch. So I'm looking at a spot. I see a flash of the green from the front sight, and then I go. And then when you get out to what you're saying, like 10, 12 yards, then you need the rear sight. So then instead of just putting flash of green in the center of the target, you're not just aligning two things, you're aligning three things. And that third alignment is going to require you to torque the gun a little bit. You got those little micro adjustments in how the gun is sitting in front of you. And that just takes time to do. Because the dot, it's automatic. Like you just look, you put the dot there, and like the gun's lined up. With the when you're shooting irons, you got look at the spot, and then you got to not just see the front sight there, but then you got to line it up in the rear notch.
Yes. So it's like right in that zone, it becomes challenging.
Yes.
Let's say.
Yes.
Okay. What did you experience in the recent match you did?
Yeah, it was. I was getting out over my skis and just being used to shooting at dot speeds and trying to do that with a dot. I tried to do that with irons. It just didn't work out. And then also like the drag offs weren't as obvious shooting with the irons. Like I can kind of see.
Tell me more about that. Could you explain what that is?
So I think a natural thing when you start trying to speed up your transitions, and I'm shooting a Zev, which is essentially a Glock. So you got a fairly long trigger pull, and there's a little delay from when you say pull a trigger to when the gun goes bang. So as you start going faster, it's pretty easy that you say fire the shot, your eyes start moving, the gun starts moving, and then it breaks. Like the shot actually breaks like a hundredth or 300ths of a second later. And that's enough easily to get deltas or misses. And it's just, it's hard to see that out of the corner of your eye, like that, like the sight's starting to move and the gun going bang. But I think with a dot, I'm able to see myself do that in the moment a lot more. So, I mean, when I'm trying to speed up my transitions or pushing transitions, there will be surprises. There'll be a lot more surprises shooting irons where I see like a drag off delta or a drag off mic. And with the dot, I'm noticing that I can see it a little bit more because I can see that red starting to move out of the corner of my eye as I'm getting my eyes to the next target and starting to move the gun.
Okay. So are you going to make any changes? Or I mean, are you going to compete more with irons, or that was a one and done for this crew? Or
No, I'm thinking, well, one thing I'm thinking is I want to shoot some single stack next year. That like one experiment there is that like I'm shooting like guns with pretty lame triggers, like a lot of trigger pull. And I'm curious if like a 1911 where you have that really short trigger pull and trigger reset, how that's what impact that's going to have. I think that would be a like a gear solution to the drag off problem. I'm really curious
Fix
about
the
that.
drag offs. I think you're. I don't think the short trigger is going to fix that, but
I'm just because there's less. I think there's going to be less time between when you say bang, like when you make that pull a trigger decision and the gun goes off. I think it's going to shorten that loop.
it is. But that speeds up all of your shooting, which will then make it easier still to look away from the target early.
True, true.
Because
But
you'll be operating, everything will be happening faster.
right, right. And but that's the thing. It'll be happening at a faster pace. So if I'm shooting a Glock and I just stick that down and grab a 1911 for the next run on a drill, what happens?
I don't know. I guess we'll see.
I guess we'll see. Yeah. So that's an idea. That's one of the things I'm thinking. But no, I'm planning to keep shooting both. Like do some matches with the dot, do some matches with irons. But it definitely taught me that like don't just shoot a dot for 2-3 months and then expect to be able to pick up an irons gun, like go to a range and then show up in a match and be competitive.
Well, to me, the real difference is like iron sights to me, shooting them at a high level competitively is a discipline thing.
Yes.
Right? Like I'm not shooting hopers at stuff. I'm being very disciplined with what I'm doing. And it feels slow. So like if I'm shooting a 30-yard target, so like shoot and the sight comes back and you have that unconscious check, then you press again.
Mm-hmm.
Like, but with a dot, that encourages me to shoot reactive to the color, to shoot very, very aggressively. Cause again, I'm trying to get the most out of it that I can. So
yeah.
The style's very different. So it's interesting that you're talking about that.
Yeah, with a dot, I'm able to, like on partials, I'm able to catch the dot as it comes down and be able to break the shot as soon as the dot stops.
Mm-hmm.
And with irons, I can't. That always gets me in trouble. It always gets me in trouble because with the dot, you're able to just look where you want to go and the dot returns there. With irons, you look where you want to go and the front sight returns, but it might not be centered in the rear notch. So you need to just make those little micro adjustments, and then you can send it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big difference. That's a big difference between them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I totally agree with that. Well, Andres, it was a good chat as always.
Yep.
I appreciate you coming on the YouTube channel. Yeah.
Very good.
As this carries on, I think we'll talk more. Let me know.
Yeah, we'll follow up. It's going to be exciting. It always